The last meal has long been a strange yet solemn tradition in the American justice system. In theory, it is the final moment meant to offer comfort to let a person eat something familiar and to feel that they are still being treated as human before everything ends. Many people choose dishes that remind them of family childhood or a happier moment somewhere in their life. But then there are others who, when faced with that final moment, do not become wiser at all. Instead, they make choices that are bizarre, meaningless, and sometimes so absurd that they leave everyone else wondering if this is even real. And the first story begins with a request that seems very simple at first. Story 1: A slice of pizza to reclaim control. This man requested his last meal to be a large pizza. No special toppings, no famous brand, no emotional backstory tied to childhood memories. Just pizza. The guards felt relieved because for once the request sounded normal and easy to handle. Then he added one small detail that froze the entire kitchen. He only wanted to eat exactly one slice of pizza, and that slice had to be precisely 1 inch wide. No more, no less, no close enough. The kitchen had to pull out a ruler like they were conducting a serious experiment rather than making food. When asked why, he calmly explained that his entire life had been out of control, and this was the final time he wanted everything to be exact. He ate the slice in a few seconds, watched the rest being taken away, then nodded in satisfaction as if he had just completed the most important task of his life. Story 2: A card that mattered more than the meal. This man made a fairly complete request for his last meal. A main dish, side dishes, dessert, everything sounded reasonable, even thoughtful, but along with it came one condition no one expected. He would only eat if there was a handwritten apology card placed on the tray. Not printed, not typed, it had to be real handwriting with a simple message. "We are sorry for everything that led to this." The kitchen was confused. The guards debated who should write it. Not because the card was difficult to make, but because no one was sure they had the right to apologize on behalf of an entire system. In the end, the card was placed on the tray. The man stared at it for a long time, longer than he looked at the food. He smiled, nodded, and then began to eat calmly. Clearly, the meal was never the most important part. What he needed right up until the final moment was the feeling that his existence had been acknowledged. Story 3: When triangles matter more than the meal. This man did not request any specific food. He gave only one rule: everything on the tray had to be triangular. Not round, not square, not close enough. It had to be clearly a triangle, the kind you see and instantly know. The kitchen began cutting bread meat, even dessert, into triangle shapes. When the tray was brought out, he examined it closely, tilting his head like a math teacher grading homework. Then he shook his head. One piece was not precise enough. The angles were not sharp, the sides were not even. He asked for a ruler. In the confused silence of the room, he measured the food himself, then broke one piece again until it matched the correct dimensions. When everything finally became perfect triangles, he smiled in satisfaction and began to eat. No one knows why he was obsessed with geometry. But clearly in his final moment, having everything in the right shape mattered far more than how good the food tasted. Story 4: When the entire cell block has to hold its breath. This man did not care what he would eat. The only thing he requested for his last meal was absolute silence. No footsteps, no jangling keys, no radios, no whispering. While he ate, the entire cell block had to be completely quiet. The request sounded simple until everyone realized that a prison is almost never silent. But because this was a last meal, the guards did their best. The hallways froze, doors stayed shut, radios were muted. The entire block fell into a strange silence, so unnatural that it made everyone uncomfortable. The man ate very slowly, chewing each bite with care. The sound of his chewing was so clear it felt amplified. A guard sneezed somewhere in the distance, and the man looked up, visibly disappointed. No one dared to laugh, but everyone knew the moment was both unsettling and funny in a way that was hard to explain. Story 5: A meal that only counts if there is smoke. This man was not overly picky about the food itself. He did not ask for rare ingredients, and he did not demand a complicated recipe. But he had one very clear condition. The food had to be steaming when it was placed in front of him. Not warm, not hot enough, it had to produce visible smoke. Something you could see, something you could feel. When the tray was brought out, he leaned in to inspect it like a director checking a shot. As the steam began to fade, he shook his head. "The effect is gone," he said, completely serious. The kitchen had to take the tray back to reheat it, even though the food was still hot. The second time, the steam rose clearly into the air. He nodded in satisfaction and started eating immediately, as if afraid the moment might slip away. Clearly, what he needed was not food, but the feeling that his final meal at least looked dramatic enough, like a proper closing scene. Story 6. A meal meant to be admired. This man did not give a long list of dishes. He only requested that his last meal be presented beautifully, like an exhibit in a museum. Every item had to be neatly arranged, balanced, and visually pleasing at first glance. When the tray was brought out, he did not touch it right away. He tilted his head, looked from left to right, then leaned in close as if inspecting a work of art. He asked for a spoon to be repositioned, a plate to be turned slightly, and a small mark on the edge of the tray to be wiped away because it ruined the composition. After everything was finally perfect, he sat there for a few more minutes. Then he smiled, pushed the tray away, and said that was enough. He did not eat a single bite. Clearly for him, seeing the meal exactly as he imagined it mattered far more than actually eating it. Story 7. When the alphabet becomes a rule for living. This man did not care what he would eat before his execution. What he cared about was order. More specifically, he would only eat if the dishes were eaten in the correct order of the English alphabet. Whatever started with the letter A had to be eaten first, then B, then C, and so on. At first, the kitchen thought this sounded simple, but the trouble started the moment the tray was brought out. He paused for a long time in front of the first two items, quietly muttering to himself like he was checking spelling. Apple or bread first. Then he suddenly froze because someone had labeled one dish as baked apple. The discussion lasted several minutes, completely serious about which letter should count first. In the end, he decided to skip both dishes to avoid making a mistake. For him, the meal did not matter. What mattered was that the alphabet be respected until the very last minute. Story 8. When one straw is not difficult enough. This man did not ask for complicated food. He had only one rule for his last meal. Everything he drank had to go through a curly straw. Not a regular straw. It had to be the kind with multiple loops, the more twisted the better, like something sold at a carnival. When the glass of water arrived with the straw, he looked at it with satisfaction. He began sipping very slowly, fully focused, like he was solving a difficult puzzle. Everything went fine for a few seconds until he suddenly started coughing because the water came through at the wrong rhythm. The entire room tensed up, but he raised his hand to signal that no help was needed. After catching his breath, he continued drinking, this time even slower. When he finished, he leaned back, let out a quiet sigh, and said that this was exactly the experience he wanted. Clearly, in his final moment, making things harder for himself gave him a greater sense of control than comfort ever could. Story 9. When crunch matters more than flavor. This man did not care much about the taste of his last meal. What he cared about was sound. He made it very clear that he would only eat foods that produced a crunch when bitten. It had to be audible, it had to be clear. If it made no sound, it might as well not exist. The kitchen brought out a tray full of crispy fried items, and he nodded in approval. Then came the potatoes. They had cooled slightly softer than expected. He took one bite, paused, then shook his head in disappointment. No climax, he said, lacking drama. He pushed the plate of potatoes away like it had personally betrayed him. The other crunchy items were eaten completely, each bite echoing clearly in the quiet room. For him, the last meal did not need to taste good, it just needed to make enough noise to prove that the moment was still alive. Story 10. Eating without being allowed to see. This man did not request any special food for his last meal. He had only one condition. While eating, he had to be completely blindfolded. Not a slight peek, fully covered. He said he did not want to see the food, did not want to be distracted by shapes or colors. He wanted to experience it through pure sensation. The problem was that once blindfolded, he could not eat by himself. After several attempts where the spoon missed his mouth, he sighed and calmly said he would need assistance. In the end, a guard had to stand beside him, carefully feeding him bite by bite like feeding a child. The entire room fell into an awkward silence. The man chewed slowly, nodding in approval after each bite, occasionally offering comments like an invisible food critic. When the meal was over, he said it was the most focused meal of his life. He saw nothing at all, yet remembered every bite clearly. Story 11. A meal for someone who never arrived. This man requested that his last meal be prepared in 2 identical portions. 2 plates, 2 sets of cutlery, 2 glasses of water, arranged facing each other like a dinner for 2. When asked who the other seat was for, he answered calmly, "The person who ruined his life." No one else was going to show up, and he knew that, but he still wanted the second meal fully prepared, neatly placed in front of the empty chair. While eating, he spoke to that chair, eating and nodding along as if taking part in a long overdue reconciliation. As the meal came to an end, he stopped, looked at the untouched plate, and smiled. He lowered his head slightly and said he hoped the other person would choke on that imaginary meal for the rest of their life. It was not forgiveness, it was a final curse wrapped inside a dinner that never happened. Story 12. The smell of a gas station and a rebellious past. This man did not say much about the food itself. The first thing he mentioned was the smell. He said his last meal had to smell like a gas station at night, that mix of fuel, warm plastic, and cheap fast food. It was a smell that reminded him of his teenage years, wandering without direction, when every decision was bad, but the feeling was freedom. The kitchen could not recreate the smell of gasoline, but they tried to get as close as possible. A hot dog bought from a local gas station, wrapped in thin paper, still carrying a faint scent of plastic and heating machines. When the tray was brought out, he took a deep breath and smiled. He ate the hot dog slowly, as if returning to an old parking lot where he once believed he was invincible. Maybe in that final moment, he did not want to think about family or regret. He just wanted to go back to a time when he felt free, even if only for a few short minutes. Story 13. A meal that could only begin at 12:12. This man did not care what he would eat, but he cared deeply about when he was allowed to eat. He demanded that his last meal begin at exactly 12:12. Not earlier, not later, not close enough. The clock had to be correct down to the second. The guards synchronized their watches. The kitchen stood by like a rocket launch team. As the second hand approached 12:12, the room became tense for absolutely no reason. The tray was placed down a few seconds late. He looked at the clock. Then he looked at the tray. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then he spoke, not yelling, just coldly, saying that the moment had been ruined. He refused to eat and demanded to wait until the next day, which was, of course, impossible. In the end, he ate in frustration, because time, the one thing he wanted to control, had betrayed him one last time. Story 14. When he wanted to sit on the other side of the table. This man did not request any special food for his last meal. What he wanted was position. He stated very clearly that while eating, he wanted to sit in the guard's chair and have the guard sit in his seat instead. Just once to know what it felt like on the other side of the table. The request was denied almost immediately. Not because it was complicated, but because it broke every remaining rule. He stayed silent for a few seconds, then sighed as if he had expected the answer all along. After that, he made a new request, much more modest. If he could not switch seats, then at least give him a swivel chair. The kitchen managed to find a chair that could rotate. While eating, he slowly spun around, looking at the room as if surveying new territory. He said nothing else, but clearly just being able to turn the chair gave him a sense of reclaiming a small piece of power he had never truly had in his life. Story 15. When the last meal becomes a challenge. This man did not request any special food, but he set one very strict rule. Everything on the tray had to be eaten with a teaspoon. No fork, no knife, no exceptions, meat, rice, bread, all of it had to follow this rule. The meal quickly became slow and clumsy. Each bite was carefully scooped up, dropped a few times, then finally made it to his mouth. The guards watched in silence, feeling like they were witnessing an online challenge where someone had forgotten the skip button. He showed no sign of frustration. On the contrary, he was intensely focused, as if he were conquering a meaningless personal record. When he finished, he looked up and said that this was the final challenge of his life. Not to win, but simply to prove that even with his last meal, he could still make things harder than they needed to be. Story 16. When the last meal has to look like a movie scene. This man described his last meal using very specific images, but never mentioned recipes or ingredients. He said he wanted the food to look exactly like something from old mafia movies. The pasta had to shine, the sauce had to be thick. Everything needed to carry the feeling of an important scene right before things go too far. The kitchen did its best to make the dish look as cinematic as possible. When the tray was placed in front of him, he stared at it for a long time. Then he sighed. He said the food was not bad, but clearly the director got it wrong. The angle was off, the lighting was not right, the feeling was not the same as in the movies. He still ate, but with mild disappointment, like an actor forced to finish a scene he did not like. For him, the problem was not the food. The problem was that this final moment of life should have looked like a better movie. Story 17. When the price matters more than the portion. This man did not care what he would eat, but he cared deeply about the price of each item. He demanded that every dish in his last meal carry the familiar odd prices of fast food. 99 cents, $1.99, $2.99, no round numbers, no rounding up. It had to look exactly like a menu board. The kitchen tried to explain that they did not price meals that way, but he refused to accept it. In the end, to satisfy him, they wrote down symbolic prices for each item. When the tray was brought out, he studied it for a moment, then shook his head. One item was too expensive by his standards. No one knew what to do until he solved it himself. He leaned forward, took a bite out of the food, then nodded and said that now it made more sense. He continued eating with clear satisfaction, as if he had just successfully negotiated with the entire world. For him, the last meal was not about being full. It was the final moment he felt he still had control over the price of things. Story 18. When the meal had to be placed on bad news. This man did not request any special food, but he had one very clear condition about what went underneath. He wanted his last meal to be placed directly on an old newspaper. No need for the exact date, no need for a specific article. Just any paper, the more bad news the better. The kitchen asked if he wanted a specific article. He shook his head and said any bad news would do as long as it created the right feeling. When the tray was brought out, the food was neatly set on the paper, the grim headlines visible beneath. He looked down, skimmed a few titles, then nodded in approval. He ate slowly, glancing at the negative news as he went, as if revisiting a moment in the past when everything began to go wrong. For him, the meal did not need to be clean or fancy. It only needed to rest on something that accurately reflected the emotions he had carried throughout his life. Story 19. When music sets the mood. This man did not care much about the food itself, but he had one very strict requirement. His last meal had to be enjoyed with a specific song. No other song, no cover version, only the original track he had chosen beforehand. The music was not decoration, it was the core of the experience. When the tray was brought out, the music played softly. He closed his eyes, chewing slowly as if immersing himself in the final scene of the movie of his life. Everything seemed perfect, until the music cut out mid-track due to a technical issue. He opened his eyes and stared at the speaker, feeling betrayed. The emotion is gone, he said calmly but firmly. He refused to continue eating until the music was restored. Finally, when the song played again, he nodded in satisfaction and resumed eating as if the last meal had only truly begun when the music was in sync with his heart. Story 20. When the kitchen delivered a plot twist. This man requested a normal meal but with one condition. The kitchen had to add a secret ingredient to any dish without telling him beforehand. The goal was not to make it taste better, but to create one final surprise before everything ended. When the tray arrived, he closed his eyes, took his first bite, and suddenly paused. A strange flavor hit his mouth, making him jump, then burst out laughing. Not because it was delicious, but because of the surprise and the sheer absurdity of himself. He continued eating the remaining bites, occasionally smiling, as if playing a little guessing game with the kitchen. Clearly, his final moment did not need to be solemn. Just a small plot twist, a tiny surprise, was enough to make his last meal feel lively, engaging, and more memorable than anything else. Story 21. When the smell of burnt food is part of the memory. This man did not care about the flavor or size of the food. What mattered to him was the smell of burnt edges. He made it clear that every item in his last meal had to have lightly charred edges. If it wasn't burnt, he would not accept it because it would not be emotional enough. The kitchen was bewildered, trying to burn the edges just enough without ruining the food completely. When the tray was brought out, he tilted his head, took a deep sniff, and nodded in satisfaction. Every bite had to sizzle lightly, as if awakening memories from the past. He chewed slowly sometimes, pausing to inhale the burnt scent as if reliving distant moments. For him, the last meal did not need to taste good or be complete. It only needed to awaken memory, and the burnt smell was what brought back emotion in his own very peculiar way. Story 22. The meal of an imaginary neighbor. This man did not care about the actual food. What mattered to him was the aroma, and he wanted his last meal to taste exactly like the dishes that the neighbor used to cook. The problem was that neighbor did not exist, at least not in reality. When the tray was brought out, he took a deep sniff and began describing the scents like a food critic. There's a hint of garlic mingled with the light roasted aroma of meat, and a touch of mystery from herbs of unknown origin. He said so seriously that the guards and kitchen staff were simultaneously baffled and barely able to keep from laughing. He ate each bite with his eyes closed as if reliving that imaginary meal. For him, the right flavor mattered more than anything on the menu. The last meal became a strange experience, both serious and absurd, but full of character. Story 23: When the last meal becomes a board game. This man did not care about the food itself, but he was extremely creative with how he ate it. He demanded that every item on the tray be eaten according to the number rolled on a die. Whatever number came up, he would eat exactly that many bites, whether it was cake meat or vegetables. The kitchen and guards exchanged glances, unsure whether to laugh or groan. He rolled the die, seriously read the result, and then carefully scooped each bite into his mouth. Each turn was a round of play, and when the final piece was eaten, he rolled the die one more time just to make sure no rules had been broken. The last meal became a complicated game, both meaningless and hilarious. No one remembered whether they were feeding a man about to die or participating in a bizarre board game, but he was completely satisfied and certain that this meal would be one of the last fun memories of his life. Story 24: When weight decides everything. This man did not care whether the food tasted good. What he cared about was the weight of every item on the tray. He demanded that everything be carefully weighed piece by piece, gram by gram. If any item was off by even a few grams, he would immediately ask for it to be adjusted. At first, the kitchen thought it was a strange but manageable request. But when the tray arrived, he frowned and used a small scale to check each item himself. One piece of cake was 1 gram heavier than requested, so he sighed and cut a bit off. A piece of vegetables was lighter than it should be, so he added a little more. The guards watched, unsure whether to intervene or simply accept it. He ate very slowly, measuring every bite with care. For him, the last meal was not about being full or enjoying the taste. It was the final moment of control in his life, and this time he refused to let weight be the thing that failed him. Story 25: When everything had to be neon. This man did not care about flavor or aroma. What mattered to him was color. He demanded that every item in his last meal be bright neon. No pale blue, no earthy red, no natural colors. Everything had to be eye-popping, glowing like children's toys. The kitchen did its best to select artificially colored foods, from ice cream cakes and drinks to dyed vegetables. When the tray was brought out, it looked like a party table for teenage kids at a birthday. He looked at the tray, smiled with satisfaction, and lifted his first spoonful. He ate each bite slowly, admiring the vivid colors before chewing as if enjoying an art exhibition. For him, the last meal did not need to be delicious, warm, or nutritious. Just seeing the colors, feeling that playful, crazy vibe was enough to make the meal an unforgettable memory. Story 26: When every bite had to be counted. This man set a strange rule for his last meal. Each dish could only be eaten in exactly 5 bites. No more, no less. Even if there was plenty of food left, even if he was starving, he would stop immediately after the 5th bite. The kitchen and guards exchanged glances, unsure whether to comply or explain that the meal was meant to satisfy hunger. But he was determined. He counted each bite as if playing a logic game. 1 extra bite, he pushed it aside. 1 bite short, he took another to make it complete. When the meal was over, he sat quietly, breathing evenly, and nodded in satisfaction. No one thought about being full or whether the food tasted good. For him, the last meal was the final moment to apply completely meaningless discipline, controlling every detail unnecessarily, and rejoicing at having defeated himself in a game he had created. Story 27: When the name of the dish decided the flavor. This man did not care much about the ingredients or how the food was cooked. What mattered to him was the name of the dish. He demanded that every item in his last meal have a poetic or artistic name that he himself invented. A piece of roasted meat became Sunset Flame. A slice of bread became Dreamy Butterfield. The kitchen initially laughed, not understanding why a name could be so important. But when the tray was brought out, he read each name, seriously closed his eyes, and sampled each bite. To everyone's surprise, he chewed, slowly nodded, and smiled. He said the food tasted better entirely because the name evoked the right feeling. Clearly for him, the last meal was not just about eating. It was an artistic experience where words could elevate the flavor, making the moment far more memorable than anything else. Story 28. When the prophecy is not meant for you. This man requested that his last meal come with a small slip of paper predicting the future. He said he wanted to know what awaited him before everything ended calmly but seriously. The kitchen and guards tried to prepare one, filling it with vague, mysterious lines, exactly the kind of prophecy he asked for. When the paper was handed to him, he unfolded it and read each line carefully. Then his expression shifted. Every prediction, every warning, every so-called secret of fate was clearly not meant for him. It was obviously written for someone else, maybe another last meal, or someone else in the prison. He let out a quiet laugh, squinted slightly, then folded the paper back up. He continued eating his last meal with a smile that was equal parts sarcastic and amused. In that moment, he realized that sometimes fate does not care what you ask for, but at least he could still enjoy one final surprise on his own terms. Story 29. When the audience is an empty chair. This man did not want to eat alone. He requested that his last meal have a special audience, an empty chair placed opposite him. He said he would talk, comment, and even critique the food as if performing for a real person, though no one else was present. When the tray was brought out, he began conversing with the chair. He commented on the kitchen's presentation, compared each piece of meat, and even argued with the chair about the flavors. No one dared to laugh because he was frighteningly serious. Yet that seriousness created an effect that was both eerie and hilarious. The guards stood still like they were watching a ghostly play. He ate slowly, talking and nodding along to the feedback from the chair. When the meal ended, he bowed to his audience, and his smile showed that he had completed a meal that was both strange and amusing in a way only he could understand. Story 30. When eating becomes meditation. This man decided that his last meal was not about rushing or getting full, but about savoring every single moment. He requested to eat rice with his hands, no chopsticks, no spoon, so he could directly feel the texture and temperature of each grain. The kitchen and guards exchanged glances, unsure how to react, but he seriously picked up each handful, placed it in his mouth, and chewed slowly. Each bite was chewed 10 times. He breathed, closed his eyes, and nodded as if meditating. The entire room fell into a strange silence, both solemn and amusing, as a man turned his last meal into an unprecedented, slow-living experience. He did not rush, he did not get frustrated. He simply enjoyed his final moments, one peaceful instant amid all the chaos. Story 31. The simplest thing. This man requested his last meal to be extremely simple. He only wanted to know the recipe for an ordinary dish he had loved as a child. No fancy ingredients, no rare delicacies, just a humble meal that reminded him of days without worries before facing the bad choices life had thrown at him. He described to the kitchen the flavors, the way it was cooked, every tiny detail he remembered, as if trying to recreate memory through each bite. The kitchen prepared the dish he requested. He looked at the tray, smiled, and slowly savored each bite. No extravagance, no showiness, just the familiar taste that brought a strange kind of comfort. In that moment, he realized that his life had always chased grand ambitions and power, but it was the simplest things that brought the most peace and happiness. He nodded in satisfaction, closed his eyes, and enjoyed his last meal. As a small lesson, sometimes simple is enough, and it is that simplicity that makes life truly memorable. The last meal is not just about the food, it's about choice, experience, and the values that truly matter in life. Some seek luxury, power, or bizarre experiences, while others turn to simplicity, memory, or small but meaningful moments they once overlooked. When everything comes to an end, the most important thing is not the food on the tray, but how each person lives and faces themselves in that final moment. The last meal, with all its absurdity, strangeness, or simplicity, serves as a reminder that happiness and peace often come from the simplest things, the details we tend to overlook in everyday life.